The envelope was waiting for me on our bed when I got home from work. Perfectly folded paper with my wife's elegant handwriting across the top. Bedroom rules. I stared at it for a long moment, wondering if this was some kind of joke or role-play suggestion. When I opened it, my confusion quickly turned to disbelief. Effective immediately, it read at the top in bold letters. What followed was a numbered list of 15 rules governing every aspect of our intimate life. Rule number 1. Intimacy only on Tuesdays and Saturdays between 9 to 10:30 p.m. Rule number 2. No spontaneous initiation without 3 hours written notice. Rule number 3. No positions except the 3 sheets specifically approved. The list went on detailing everything from acceptable duration to mandatory showering protocols, and even which words I was allowed to say. 5 years of marriage, and suddenly I needed written permission to touch my own wife. I sat on the edge of our bed, reading through these ridiculous demands again. Rule number 11 especially caught my eye. Performance will be evaluated weekly with feedback forms. Was this the same woman who'd been playfully pulling me into closets during family gatherings just 2 years ago? I heard her car pull into the driveway. Instead of confronting her immediately, I slipped the list into my pocket. At dinner, she kept glancing at me expectantly, waiting for me to mention it. I deliberately avoided the subject, discussing work and asking about her day as if nothing had changed. Her fingers drummed nervously against her water glass. "Did you see what I left for you?" she finally asked after 30 minutes of small talk. "The list of demands?" "Yes, I saw it." Her eyes narrowed slightly at my choice of words. "They're not demands, they're boundaries." This wasn't the first power play she'd attempted recently. Last month, she'd organized my closet, throwing out clothes she deemed inappropriate. 2 weeks ago, she installed a tracking app on my phone for safety. Each time, I'd push back firmly but reasonably. This, however, was crossing into territory I couldn't ignore. Where did this come from? I asked calmly, because this isn't something married couples typically do. She straightened in her chair. "My friend Cynthia says clear guidelines are essential for a modern marriage. Besides, I read online that most relationship problems stem from miscommunication about expectations." Cynthia, of course, her recently divorced friend who'd been filling her head with nonsense since the separation. The same woman who told my wife that her husband's biggest mistake was giving her too much freedom. "I've spent considerable time thinking about our relationship," my wife continued, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality. "These rules will create structure and improve our satisfaction metrics." Satisfaction metrics. Who talks about their marriage like a customer service survey? This wasn't my wife speaking. These were someone else's words coming from her mouth. "I see," was all I said, returning to my dinner. My calm reaction clearly wasn't what she expected. She kept waiting for an argument, a negotiation, or immediate compliance. But I gave her none of these. Later that night, when she tried to discuss the list again, I simply said I needed time to process it and went to sleep in the guest room. The next morning, I left for work early without waking her. Throughout the day, she sent increasingly anxious texts asking what I thought about her new system. I replied that we would discuss it properly that evening. Meanwhile, I was carefully considering my response, one that would address not just this absurd list, but the concerning pattern of control that had been developing in our marriage. What she didn't realize was that her little list had forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding for months. Our relationship had fundamentally changed, and not for the better. The woman who once valued spontaneity and mutual respect was now attempting to regulate our most intimate moments, like a bureaucratic procedure. By the time I drove home that evening, I had formulated my response. One simple, clear response that would either save our marriage or end it. Either way, I refuse to live under a regime of bedroom regulations and permission slips. The time had come to reestablish the respect our relationship was built on or walk away entirely. Looking back, I should have seen this coming. The control issues didn't appear overnight. They crept in gradually, like ivy slowly overtaking a wall, until you suddenly realize your house is covered in it. When we first married, our relationship was balanced and respectful. We made decisions together, compromised naturally, and our intimate life was spontaneous and fulfilling. The change began subtly about 2 years ago. She started making small comments about my choices, innocent suggestions about my clothes, my friends, how I spent my free time. I still remember the first significant incident. I planned a weekend fishing trip with my college buddies, something I'd done annually for years. 3 days before leaving, she claimed to have forgotten about it and scheduled a dinner with her boss that same weekend. When I reminded her of my plans, she didn't get angry. Instead, she became tearful, talking about how she felt abandoned and how her career might suffer if she attended alone. Wanting to be supportive, I canceled my trip. She was so appreciative afterward, showering me with affection and gratitude. It felt good to be needed to be the supportive husband. I didn't realize I was reinforcing a pattern that would slowly expand into every area of our lives. After that, the requests multiplied. She needed me to change my gym schedule because she didn't like being home alone in the evenings. She questioned why I needed to meet friends for drinks after work when we could spend that time together. She began commenting on my diet, replacing foods in our kitchen with healthier alternatives. She selected. Each change seemed reasonable in isolation. Each surrender on my part was met with temporary approval and affection. But the goalposts kept moving. The approval became more conditional, the affection less frequent. Our intimate life followed the same trajectory. What began as preferences, I really like when we evolved into subtle criticisms. Do you have to? Eventually, these transformed into outright directives. From now on, we're only going to with each concession on my part. Her demands grew bolder. 6 months ago, she eliminated spontaneity entirely. Any physical affection had to follow her carefully orchestrated script. Deviation was met with sighs, complaints, or her suddenly not being in the mood. The joy and connection that should exist between partners had been replaced by performance anxiety and walking on eggshells. The night before she presented her infamous rules, we'd had another revealing incident. I'd approached her affectionately while she was reading in bed. Nothing presumptuous, just a kiss on her shoulder. She recoiled as if touched by something distasteful. I can't just switch into that mode without preparation, she snapped. There's a time and place, and this isn't it. When I asked when would be appropriate, she'd responded she would let me know. The chill in her voice made it clear. Intimacy had become a resource she controlled, dispensed as reward or withheld as punishment. I'd gone to sleep troubled that night, but still unprepared for the formalized list that appeared the next day. In retrospect, the list wasn't new development. It was just the codification of the unwritten rules she'd already established. What bothered me most wasn't the content of the rules themselves, though they were ridiculous enough. It was what they represented. The complete deterioration of mutual respect in our relationship. I had become a subordinate in my own marriage, expected to follow directives rather than participate as an equal partner. That evening, after our brief dinner conversation, I went into my home office while she watched television. I opened my laptop and began researching what I'd suspected for some time, that my wife's behavioral changes might be influenced by more than just her friendship with Cynthia. Sure enough, I found several self-help books in her browser history with telling titles like Power Dynamics in Marriage and How to Train Your Husband. I also discovered she joined an online forum where women exchanged tactics for domesticating their partners. My stomach tightened as I read posts she liked about breaking his independence and establishing dominance in the bedroom. This wasn't my wife anymore. This was someone who had been systematically radicalized into viewing our marriage as a power struggle rather than a partnership. And now I had a decision to make. Surrender to this new reality or take decisive action to either restore our relationship or end it with my dignity intact. That night, I slept in the guest room again, claiming I needed space to process the new rules. My wife seemed unsettled by my calm demeanor, clearly expecting either immediate compliance or explosive anger. My measured response left her uncertain and slightly anxious, a tactical advantage I hadn't anticipated, but welcomed. The next morning was Saturday. I left early, telling her I needed to clear my head. In reality, I had a plan. If I was going to address this situation effectively, I needed more information about what was driving her behavior. I met with our mutual friend, Robert, at a coffee shop across town. Robert's wife and mine had been close for years before Cynthia entered the picture. Over the past few months, they'd grown distant as my wife spent more time in her new social circle. "She's completely different," Robert said after I explained the situation. "My wife tried to talk to her last month after she made some concerning comments about training you properly. Cynthia was there and practically interrupted every sentence, telling her that women need to reclaim their power in relationships." Robert's confirmation matched my suspicions. This wasn't just about bedroom rules. My wife had been methodically influenced to view our marriage as a power struggle. She needed to win. "Cynthia's divorce really messed her up," Robert continued. "From what I hear, she's convinced it happened because she allowed her husband too much freedom. Now she's on a mission to help other wives avoid her fate." This explained the sudden fixation on control. My wife wasn't just creating arbitrary rules. She was following a playbook written by someone whose marriage had imploded, desperately trying to avoid the same outcome through entirely counterproductive means. I thanked Robert and left with greater clarity. On the drive home, I formulated my approach. Direct confrontation would only trigger defensiveness. Negotiating the rules would implicitly accept their legitimacy. Passive-aggressive compliance would damage us both. No, this required a strategic response that addressed the root issue, the fundamental respect and equality our marriage was supposed to be built upon. When I arrived home, my wife was in the kitchen preparing lunch, her movements tense and deliberate. She'd texted me 3 times while I was out, each message more pointed than the last about needing to finalize our arrangement. "We need to talk about the rules," she said immediately. "We will," I assured her. "But first, I'd like to take you to dinner tonight somewhere nice." She looked surprised but pleased. "Are you finally ready to discuss the terms?" "I'm ready to have an important conversation about our marriage," I replied neutrally. "Meanwhile, I think we both need a day to relax. Why don't you get a massage this afternoon?" My treat, the unexpected offer, disarmed her suspicion. She agreed, likely assuming my gesture indicated forthcoming capitulation. After she left the spa, I began preparing my response, not in anger or haste, but with careful consideration of what I truly wanted from our marriage. I spent the afternoon reviewing our wedding photos, reading old anniversary cards, and reflecting on when things had been good between us. I wasn't ready to discard 5 years of marriage, but I also wouldn't sacrifice my self-respect to preserve it. That evening, I made reservations at the upscale restaurant where we'd celebrated our first anniversary. I dressed sharply, drove us there in comfortable silence, and ensured we were seated in a private corner where our conversation wouldn't be overheard. After ordering, my wife placed a small notebook on the table, presumably to document whatever concessions or counter-offers I might make to her rules. The sight of it strengthened my resolve. "Before we discuss your list," I said calmly, "I'd like to understand something. What do you hope these rules will accomplish in our marriage?" She seemed prepared for this question. Structure and clarity. Relationships fail when expectations aren't clear. I'm taking initiative to define parameters that will benefit us both. "Interesting," I replied. "And were you planning to follow similar rules yourself?" This question caught her off guard. "The rules are about your behavior, not mine." "I see. So, it's not about mutual expectations. It's about controlling my behavior specifically." Her eyes narrowed. "It's about establishing healthy boundaries. Boundaries are something we establish together." I countered. "What you created is a unilateral set of demands." I could see frustration building in her expression. She hadn't expected me to challenge the premise rather than the specific rules. "Are you going to accept them or not?" she finally asked. I had prepared my response. I said, reaching into my jacket. "But first, I want you to know that I remember the woman I married. Someone who valued partnership, mutual respect, and genuine connection. I hope she remembers that, too." I placed a sealed envelope on the table between us. She looked at it, then at me, uncertainty flickering across her face. "Open it," I said. "It contains my one simple response to your 15 rules." She reached for the envelope with visible trepidation, her fingers trembling slightly. As she opened it, I maintained steady eye contact, my expression deliberately neutral. Inside was a single sheet of paper, not a counterproposal or negotiation of her rules, but something entirely different. The document was a preliminary divorce agreement already filled out with our basic information. Not filed, not finalized, but complete enough to demonstrate the seriousness of my response. Her face drained of color as she registered what she was looking at. "What is this?" she whispered, though the answer was plainly obvious. My response, I said calmly, "You presented me with 15 rules that fundamentally change the nature of our relationship. This is my counteroffer. One simple choice." She stared at the document, then back at me, shock evident in her expression. "You're filing for divorce because I set some boundaries." "No," I corrected her. "I'm showing you what happens when one person unilaterally dictates the terms of a marriage. What you gave me wasn't a set of boundaries. It was an ultimatum that transformed our relationship from a partnership into a power dynamic where you control even our most intimate moments." Her hands began to shake more visibly. "But I thought you would just discuss the rules or suggest changes, which would validate the premise that you have the authority to impose such rules in the first place." I replied, "I reject that premise entirely." Our food arrived, creating an awkward pause as the waiter set down our plates and departed. Neither of us moved to eat. "This is extreme," she said, her voice rising slightly. "All marriages have rules and expectations." Agreed, but healthy marriages establish those expectations together through mutual respect and consideration. What you did was draft a contract treating me as a subordinate who needs regulation rather than a husband who deserves respect. I took a sip of water before continuing. "Let me ask you something. Where did these specific rules come from? Did you create them based on your own needs, or are you following someone else's template for how to control your husband?" Her sudden avoidance of eye contact told me everything. Cynthia suggested some of them. She admitted reluctantly, but I added my own, and the books and forums, the ones about establishing dominance and breaking a man's independence. Her eyes widened in surprise that I knew about those. "You went through my browsing history, just as you went through my phone, my emails, my closet, and apparently now want to regulate my body and sexuality." I countered without raising my voice. "The difference is I did it to understand why my wife suddenly transformed into someone I don't recognize." She looked down at the divorce papers again, reality sinking in. "You can't be serious about this. 5 years of marriage, and you throw it away over a list." "That's precisely my question to you," I replied. "Are you willing to throw away our marriage over your need to control me? Because that's what this list represents. The death of equality and mutual respect in our relationship." I leaned forward slightly. "The woman I married valued partnership. We made decisions together. We respected each other's autonomy. Our intimate life was an expression of mutual desire and connection, not a scheduled performance with evaluation forms." Something shifted in her expression, the first crack in the facade of certainty she'd been projecting. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the woman I'd married, looking back at me with confusion and fear. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, her voice smaller. "I want my wife back," I said simply, "not this new version who views marriage as a power struggle. I want the woman who saw us as equals, who didn't need to control every aspect of my behavior to feel secure." I gestured to the divorce papers. "Those aren't filed yet. Whether they ever are depends entirely on your next move. But understand this. I will not live according to your rules. I will not be evaluated, scheduled, and regulated in my own marriage. Either we rebuild our relationship on mutual respect, or we don't have a relationship at all." She stared at the document for what felt like an eternity. When she finally looked up, tears had formed in her eyes. "I don't want a divorce," she whispered. "Then you have a decision to make." I replied gently but firmly. "You can have a husband who is an equal partner, or you can have these rules. You cannot have both." I reached across the table, not touching her but offering my open hand. "The choice is yours, but choose carefully because this moment will define our future together or apart." The restaurant continued its quiet hum of activity around us. Other couples chatting and enjoying their meals, entirely unaware of the pivotal moment unfolding at our table. My wife stared at my outstretched hand, then at the divorce papers as the full weight of her decision settled upon her shoulders. Tears that had been welling in her eyes finally spilled over. She made no move to wipe them away as they tracked silently down her cheeks. For nearly a full minute, she remained frozen, staring at the divorce papers as if they might suddenly transform into something less consequential. Then, with trembling fingers, she picked up the document and tore it in half. Then, in quarters, she continued until the papers were reduced to small, irreparable pieces. "I don't want this," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to lose you." I maintained my composure, despite the surge of emotion I felt. Tearing up that paper doesn't solve our problem. I can print another copy if nothing changes. She pushed a pile of torn paper aside and reached for my still outstretched hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't realize what I was doing to us." "I think you did," I replied, not unkindly, but firmly. "You made deliberate choices. What I need to understand is why. What happened to make you believe that controlling me was necessary for our marriage to work?" She withdrew her hand and looked away, embarrassment now mixing with the sadness in her expression. The restaurant around us continued its gentle hum of conversation and clinking glasses, creating an odd backdrop for our intensely private moment of reckoning. It started with Cynthia. She finally admitted after her divorce. She kept saying she failed because she'd given her husband too much freedom, that men need boundaries and control, or they inevitably leave or cheat. "And you believed her?" I asked, despite 5 years of evidence to the contrary in our own marriage. "Not at first," she said, "but she was so convinced, so certain." She introduced me to her support group, other women who followed this philosophy. They all had stories about how establishing control had saved their marriages, except Cynthia herself is divorced. I pointed out, she says that's because she implemented these strategies too late. She looked down at her untouched food. "I know how it sounds now, saying out loud to you, but when you're in that echo chamber, hearing the same message repeatedly from multiple sources, it starts to make a twisted kind of sense." I studied her face, looking for signs of the wife I knew, and the online forums, the books about breaking a man's independence. Color rose in her cheeks. Cynthia's group recommended them. They have this theory that modern marriages fail because women have surrendered their natural authority in the household. They believe reclaiming that control is essential, especially in intimate matters. So, the bedroom rules weren't really about our intimacy at all. I said they were about control. She nodded almost imperceptibly. The group leader says that regulating physical intimacy is the fastest way to establish dominance in a relationship. Her voice had become so quiet, I had to lean forward to hear her. She promises that once the husband accepts the first set of restrictions, his resistance to other forms of control diminishes rapidly. The calculated nature of it hit me like a physical blow. So, I was being conditioned like an animal. Fresh tears welled in her eyes. "When you put it that way, there's no other way to put it." I interrupted, my voice harder than I intended. I took a breath, regaining my composure. "You were deliberately manipulating me as part of a strategic plan to remove my agency in our relationship." She covered her face with her hands. "I was scared," she admitted through her fingers. "Cynthia and the others kept warning me that if I didn't take control, I'd end up abandoned like them. They made it sound like an inevitability that all men eventually leave unless they're properly managed." "And what evidence did they present to support this theory?" I asked. Besides her own failed relationships, they had testimonials, she said weakly, clearly hearing how inadequate this sounded. Women who claim these techniques save their marriages. "Did you ever meet these women?" "Speak with their husbands." She shook her head. "So, you were willing to destroy what we built together based on the advice of strangers on the internet and a divorced friend who's clearly working through her own issues?" She lowered her hands, her makeup streaked by tears. "When you say like that, it sounds ridiculous." "It is ridiculous," I agreed, "but it's also deeply hurtful. You didn't trust in us, in me enough to resist this toxic influence." "I was wrong," she whispered, reaching again for my hand. This time, I let her take it. "I got caught up in fear and bad advice. But this isn't really me. You know that, right? The woman you married wouldn't have done this." I studied her closely, weighing her sincerity against the methodical control campaign she'd been waging. The question is whether that woman still exists or she's been replaced by someone who views me as an adversary who needs to be controlled rather than a partner who deserves respect. She squeezed my hand desperately. She exists. I exist. Please, she pleaded, tell me how to fix this. I withdrew my hand gently but firmly. That depends on what fixing means to you. If you're looking for the minimum gesture required to avoid divorce while continuing the same underlying pattern, there's nothing to discuss. No, she shook her head emphatically. I want us back. The real us. Then we have work to do, I said, beginning with your list. We didn't finish our meal that night. Instead, we paid the bill and drove home in contemplative silence. Once inside our house, my wife went straight to our bedroom and returned holding her list of rules, her hand still trembling slightly. What do you want me to do with this? She asked, standing in the center of our living room, looking lost and uncertain. Whatever you do should be your decision. I replied, taking a seat on the couch. Not mine, not Cynthia's, not some forums. What you genuinely believe is right for our marriage. She looked down at the paper, then back at me. Without hesitation, she tore it into pieces, not with the desperate energy she'd shown with the divorce papers at the restaurant, but with deliberate, decisive movements. When she finished, she let the fragments fall into our fireplace. I want to burn it, she said. I want to watch it disappear completely. I nodded and handed her the matchbox from the mantel. She struck a match and dropped it onto the torn paper, watching as flames consumed the evidence of her misguided attempt at control. That's a start, I said as the last pieces blackened and curled. But paper is easy to destroy. Rebuilding trust is considerably harder. She sat beside me, maintaining a respectful distance. I'll do whatever it takes. First, I need to know everything, I said. How deep does this go? What other aspects of our life together have been influenced by this philosophy? Over the next 3 hours, she confessed to manipulations I hadn't even detected. Subtle ways she'd been implementing this control strategy beyond the obvious list. She'd been selectively deleting messages from male friends on my social media. She'd been accidentally shrinking my favorite clothes in the wash. She'd even called my boss once, pretending to be a medical office to get me out of a business trip. Each revelation stung, but I maintained my composure. This wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about complete transparency at the foundation for rebuilding. What about Cynthia in this group? I asked when she finished. I'll cut contact completely, she said without hesitation. I already deleted the forum account while you were in the bathroom at the restaurant. I was so ashamed when I saw your face as you described what I'd been doing. And how do I know this isn't just another strategic retreat, a temporary concession to regain my trust before implementing a more subtle version of the same plan? It was a harsh question, but necessary. She flinched, but didn't look away. You don't, she admitted. Words mean nothing right now, but I'm hoping that over time my actions will prove this is real. She hesitated, then added, I've also booked an appointment with a therapist and myself, not couples counseling yet. I need to understand why I was so easily influenced to betray everything we built together. This surprised me. It showed an awareness of the deeper issue that I hadn't expected. That's a good step, I acknowledged. But I want to be clear. I'm not staying in this house tonight, or possibly for several nights. I need space to process everything. Fear flashed across her face. Are you leaving me? No, I'm taking time to think. There's a difference. I stood up and headed to our bedroom to pack a small bag. She followed but remained in the doorway, watching silently as I gathered essentials. When will you come back? She finally asked as I zipped the bag closed. When I'm ready, I replied, not before. And when I do, we'll establish new boundaries together. Mutual expectations based on respect, not control. Before leaving, I turned to her one last time. One more thing. I want access to your phone and accounts. The same level of transparency you demanded from me. Not because I want to control you, but because trust needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. She handed over her phone without hesitation. Unlocked. Everything's open to you. No more secrets. The next week was a period of careful reconstruction. I stayed at a hotel for 3 nights, using the time to consider what I truly wanted. When I returned home, we began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. She attended therapy twice weekly. She ended her friendship with Cynthia despite the woman's manipulative attempts to maintain contact. Most importantly, she gradually returned to the person I had married. Thoughtful, respectful, and treating me as a partner rather than a subject to be controlled. 6 months later, our marriage is stronger than it's been in years. The intimacy that had been regulated to the point of extinction has returned. Now, based on mutual desire and open communication rather than power dynamics, we make decisions together. We respect each other's independence while choosing to build a life together. Last week, she handed me an envelope similar to the one that had contained her infamous rules. Inside was a different kind of list. Not demands, but expressions of gratitude for specific ways I'd supported her over the years, and sincere apologies for having lost sight of the partnership we built. Your one simple response changed everything, she wrote at the end. You could have matched control with control, or simply walked away. Instead, you offered a clear choice that forced me to confront what I was destroying. Thank you for fighting for us when I'd forgotten what we were worth fighting for. Sometimes the most powerful response to someone trying to control you isn't anger or submission. It's the quiet strength of knowing your own worth and refusing to accept anything less than the respect you deserve. My wife's list of bedroom rules didn't just disappear that night. It was replaced by something far more meaningful. A genuine recommitment to the equality and mutual respect that make a marriage worth having in the first place. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.